in, everybody, to another edition of Boy, I'm Doing That Radio Thing Again, also known as Sad Times. My name is Kevin. I'm your host. So happy you joined us. If you are here for the first time, welcome. If you're returning, welcome. Welcome to one and all. If you are here for the first time and have never listened to Sad Times, here's a quick primer. Sad Times is a show in which each week we have a kind and generous guest who comes on and talks about times from their life that were difficult, hard, that were upsetting, traumatic events that they've gone through. And we do this not to judge that person, not to solve the problem, nor to diagnose it. It is simply to allow that story to be told, because we at Sad Times believe that these difficult times are universal stories, but they're not often told. So the hope here is that in each of these stories, somebody out there who's listening can hear something and say, hey, I thought I was the only one who went through that, or I thought I was the only one who thought that way. So that's what Sad Times is. We do have a website. It is www.sadtimespodcast.com. Please go check it out. And if you haven't already, check it out, leave a review, and also please subscribe wherever you do find podcasts appearing on your phone. That is where you can subscribe to Sad Times. All right, so that is Sad Times. Before we get to our wonderful guests today, we do have to pay the bills per usual. So let's get to this week's sponsor. This week's sponsor is the way Ron DeSantis stands at a podium during a debate. When not workshopping his very human smile, and when he is not throwing pointless red meat to the base, Ron DeSantis stands with his arms doing what no one's natural arms do, his hands turned as if he is mimicking a drawing of a Hanna-Barbera character. That's the way Ron DeSantis stands at a podium during a debate, the essence of charisma through posture. All right. Well, as always, we do want to make sure that we do support our sponsors. Please use the code FAKE at checkout. That's FAKE at checkout. All right, bills are paid. Brent, Wade, everybody ready? Okay, we're ready. All right, so let's get to our wonderful guest today. It is Melanie. Melanie, how you doing?
I'm good. Although I have to say your sponsor has me laughing pretty hard.
I
So
hope they're not listening, because I want them to come back. I mean, that's a pretty good sponsor. But really, what is he doing with his arms? I don't get it. I don't get it. But then again, I used to be an actor, and I would be on stage sometimes, and I'd be like, I don't know what to do with my hands. There's a cattail. Cattail.
Yes.
What's that cat's name?
This is Squeaky.
Hi, Squeaky. And where are you today, Melanie?
I am in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So
Nice.
I'm near Lake Superior, and we live in the woods. So we've got like 40 acres in the forest, and then we butt up against a national forest. So we're very in the woods and remote. We're like 30 miles from like the town. So we're pretty far out.
That's pretty neat that you live like right up next to a national forest. Do you do a lot of hiking up there?
Yeah, we do. It's really cool because we have 2 dogs. And so we can just like walk out our front door and just go right for a walk in the woods. Like we don't have to drive places to find wooded areas. So like every morning we start our day with a walk in the woods, and, we can just kind of head out and go in different directions. It's really pretty.
Do you ever read the Bill Bryson book, A Walk in the Woods, out loud before you go on a walk in the woods?
No.
No? Okay. Just a suggestion. I've not read the book, but I've heard it's funny. And how long have you been up in the Upper Peninsula?
So we've lived here full time now for just over 3 years. It was kind of like our second home, our cabin. We bought it back in 2018. And then we ended up moving up here full time during the pandemic.
Nice. That's a good place, I think, to be, especially with 40 acres and a national forest. And for anybody who has not been to the Upper Peninsula, no joke, it is beautiful up there. It is beautiful. Although we were talking before we recorded, and you only have a couple inches of snow right now in January.
Yes, we should have much more. And it's very sad because we do dog races up here in February. So it's kind of like it's a pretty big event, and it's where a lot of the mushers do they qualify for the Iditarod in Alaska. And so last year they actually had to cancel because we didn't have enough snow. And that was like a total fluke. Like that never happens. But now we have so little snow, it almost looks like possibly they might have to cancel again, which would be a huge bummer.
And I bet, I don't know much about that, but I bet those dogs get so excited about that.
They do. It's really, I'm a dog lover. So when we went and watched, I was a little concerned because I was worried that it's, I don't know, mistreated or
Right.
something like that. But these are like sled dogs where like they are all about pulling and running and they love it. And the mushers and the dogs, like they live together. They are like a total
Yeah.
unit. So it is a team effort. It's a really cool experience.
That's really cool. Well, I hope that, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I hope that you get more snow. I don't believe I've ever said that. As we discussed also, I hate snow, even though I'm recording from right outside Chicago. So there's that. Okay, so, Melanie, you reached out to us. Let's talk about, and you wanted to talk, and we're going to get to some of the really cool work that you're doing. But let's talk about where you came from, where you grew up. Can you tell us about where you grew up and kind of how you were as a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan and I grew up downstate and outside of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I was the youngest of four, so I had three older sisters and my mom and my dad. And it was, my parents gave us everything we wanted from like a material aspect, but it wasn't a very healthy or supportive or functional kind of home. There was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of physical abuse, emotional abuse. My parents used to hit each other pretty badly. It was pretty ugly and pretty nasty at home.
Jeez.
And I was really, really anxious. Like, first of all, I was just kind of born anxious. I'm just genetically kind of wired that way.
Mm-hmm.
But then on top of that, I was always so stressed out about what was going on at home that I was just like this walking ball of anxiety all the time because I was so worried about my parents fighting. I never wanted to go anywhere because I felt like I needed to be there to intervene to stop them because my three older sisters were all kind of like dealing with it in their own way,
Uh-huh.
where they were kind of like out in the world. Like one of them, developed a drinking very early on, and they all kind of had their own ways of coping. But I felt like, okay, I'm the last one here. I need to protect. I need to stop the fighting. So I wouldn't leave and I would just sit at home and kind of read quietly and listen. And I knew kind of like the elevations that would happen. When it got to a certain point, that's when I need to jump in because if I jumped in at that point, I could stop it from getting physical. So it was a pretty stressful living environment, but you wouldn't have known that from the outside looking in. We lived in a beautiful home and all of that.
And let me ask you this. So how old were you when you kind of felt the need to take on that responsibility as to stop the fighting, that very adult, non-child responsibility?
I remember starting that probably around like 7 or 8.
Wow.
I actually built like a little fort in the living room where I covered a table with a blanket and I had pillows inside of there because the living room was like a central location. So I could hear stuff going on upstairs and I could hear stuff going on in the family room at the front of the house. So I would go in there with a flashlight and a book and I would just kind of lay in there and read and then wait until I needed to come out of my little fort and do something. So I remember starting that pretty young.
That is heartbreaking. That is very heartbreaking. Did you read, like Roald Dahl? What did you like to read when you were younger?
So I read a lot of my sister's hand-me-down books. So a lot of like Judy Blume,
Sure.
Beverly Cleary. Like I loved Ramona.
Yeah.
She was my absolute favorite. But my favorite book was this book called The Real Me by Betty Miles. And I don't even think it was that popular of a book, but for some reason it was in our little, home library collection. And I reread that book over and over again. And it gave me like hope because it was about this young girl who was, had to kind of go against the grain and was strong. And, people didn't think that she could accomplish things and she had to like prove herself. And she did it with such courage and dignity and integrity. And so I got like so much strength from her. And so I reread that book constantly.
That's awesome. And yeah, before we spoke, I had never heard of that book. And that sounds like a pretty amazing book for a young woman to read. So that's cool that Somehow that got into your library. And hey, just a reminder, books, they're good. Okay. So you're obviously a ball of stress and anxiety. If you are even building a fort and in there, yeah, sure, you're reading, you're relaxing, but you're listening for something that you fear you're going to have to stop. So you're just always on, I would imagine. Were you pretty active in school and as you went up through your high school years and such?
Absolutely. I was a total go-getter, high achiever kind of kid. So I was a swimmer and I played softball. I did worked really hard at school. So I, got good grades. Like in high school, I was in the National Honor Society. I did forensics and,
Woohoo!
Competed at the state level there. So it was, I was always trying to because I think I felt like I didn't want to be a problem to my parents because a couple of my older sisters had kind of taken on that role of being the problem people in the family. I think, in family therapy, you learn, like when you study family therapy, you learn that a lot of times kids will take on the role of being the problem child so they can become the scapegoat of the family. So it gives the parents something to kind of focus on and fight about. And it's a very subconscious kind of thing that happens. But a couple of my sisters, they took on those roles and they were really bad. And I did not want to cause any more conflict at home that was already occurring. So I felt like I need to do everything to prevent that. So I would clean the house. I would work really hard at school. I did, I tried to do everything to the absolute best I could so that my parents wouldn't have anything to fight over.
Again, heartbreaking. And you also said like, oh, you lived in a nice house. Nobody even knew. So did you feel like you could, so you're anxious all day at home, the place where we're supposed to feel the safest, et cetera. Did you feel like you could talk to people outside of the home about what was going on, about the troubles that you were having personally or your family troubles?
No, in our house, we were very much taught, like, you don't tell anyone what's going on. People, because first of all, my mom was always like, oh, it's just as bad in other homes as it is in ours. And so she kind of fed this belief that like this was going on, but I knew that wasn't true because I'd go to my friends' houses and I'd see them. I saw the way the parents talked to each other, and it was very different than the way my parents spoke. So I knew there was no way that these parents were beating on each other, calling each other really cruel names or anything like that. But we were taught you don't share what's going on inside the house, but you also don't share what's going on inside of you. Like nobody needs to know what you're feeling or what you're experiencing because really like there's no need for you to feel bad, almost like you're nervous. What's wrong with you? Why would you be scared? You've got it great. You've got this great house and you have a, roof over your head. You've got nothing to complain about. Be quiet. So we were kind of taught to not share anything. So I would hold everything inside. I wouldn't tell anybody what was going on at home. I kept a diary and I did write in my diary. And I have all of those.
Oh, good.
My diary. I kept them, which was really helpful to kind of validate my experience a bit as I grew up. But yeah, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell friends. I didn't tell teachers or anyone. I kept it all inside.
Wow. And you had told me too, like, so you would maybe go to people, maybe your parents, right? And say, I'm anxious. And they totally shut that down and said, no, you're not, et cetera, et cetera. So you had to find ways for you to cope that felt healthy to you. So I know you said you journaled, you would go on walks by yourself just to get out of that environment and maybe to clear your head.
Yes, I would go for walks alone a lot. And so I would make sure though that it was like a good spot in the house where I knew, either my parents were settled in or my sisters were away from home where nothing was going to happen. So I knew that it was safe. And then I would go for a walk by myself. I loved going for walks in the rain. It felt just very, like really relaxing and soothing. I would take a lot of baths and like bubble baths and like listen to music that was really calming and relaxing to me. I focused on it's probably very much like a control thing, but I was really focused on just keeping everything very organized and neat.
Mm,
That helped me feel better about things if I knew where everything in my room was, or if I knew that all of my schoolwork was done and I could check items off of a list. And so I liked having everything kind of complete and organized. That helped me cope with some of the stress and anxiety too.
right. That makes sense. And you said that like you would be at friends' houses and you'd say, "Oh, well, this is nothing like my house." So when did you realize maybe that you had to unlearn some of these behaviors that you were seeing? Was that an added stress to be like, well, why do I have to unlearn this? Or was that something you learned in real time? Or as you were older, you said, okay, I've got to X, Y, and Z away from those patterns?
No, I realized probably, I guess maybe in high school. I don't remember it being like a conscious kind of decision, but in high school, I was very much like, there's no way I'm growing up to be like my parents. There is no way I'm following in my sister's footsteps. Like I've got all of these, models in front of me, and not one of them looks like it's working out in anyone's favor.
Right.
So I am not like following in one. I have to figure things out on my own. And so it wasn't so much of like I need to unlearn stuff, but almost like I know what I don't want. And then once I went away to college and I got out of the house, that's when I started to realize, like, oh crap, I really do have to unlearn things,
Mm,
because I had no idea how to really self regulate. It was so easy for me to just completely freak out with some anxiety or with some negative thinking, or if I was angry or upset. I never hit anyone or said like the cruel, awful things that my parents did, but still I had that that intense anger that I saw in them. Like I recognized it in myself.
wow.
And so it was like I have to learn how to manage these feelings in a different way, because I don't ever want to talk to people the way that they spoke to people. I don't ever want to make somebody feel like they have to walk on eggshells around me the way that we had to in our home growing up.
And once you got to college, was there more mental health support than, say, growing up? I mean, it doesn't sound like you had, certainly didn't have it at home, and it doesn't sound like there were a lot of resources to you outside of the home. So were those resources becoming more available when you were in college?
Not so much, unfortunately. So I'm 47. And, when I went away to college, it was, the mid like 94 is when
Hmm.
I graduated high school. So I went away to college, and it was like people weren't talking about mental health. We didn't have access to resources. So I didn't even know about and I went to a major university. I didn't even know about like a university counseling center or
Oh,
anything
wow.
like that. So I wasn't getting that support. But what I did do is I took a psychology class. And when I took that psychology class, that's when I really started to realize that there are things I can do. That's almost like when I started to almost like, self-help myself through what I was learning in that class.
Once again, and maybe I'm I'm certainly being an armchair psychologist here, but once again taking on the burden to fix something, and this time it's trying to fix what you've learned, and that's a lot to deal with when you're 19, 20 years old, and because there's so much going on then, man. And so you were at college, but then you took a one of your first weird kind of nonlinear paths there. You dropped out with a semester to go, right?
I did. I was at college and I was really kind of questioning why I was even there. I literally had only applied to one school, which even back then wasn't common. Most people applied at least to a couple schools
Mm-hmm.
back in the 90s. Now, most kids apply to many more than that, but I only applied to the one that was kind of like our family school. Like, this is where everyone in my family went to college. So why wouldn't I go there?
Right.
And, so I went there, and then I'm there, and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Like, I don't know what I want to be majoring in. I don't know what I want to do. Why am I getting this degree? Why am I here? So I had already struggled all the way through college with the courses I was taking. I was drinking a lot. I was smoking a lot of weed. I wasn't healthy
Hmm.
for myself at all. So I had one semester to go and I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I can't take it at all. So I dropped out and ended up moving to San Francisco with no
Wow.
job, no money, no place to live. And because I really wanted to just like get as far away from my family and get as far away from my hometown as possible. And like anyone who knew me, it was almost like I needed to go someplace to like figure out who I was and what I wanted and what was important to me in life. And I couldn't do that with people who like were rooted in my past.
Now, when you do, that's a very brave thing to do as a 21, 22-year-old, very brave. I don't know, because I only applied to one school too. One. And it's a prestigious university in Southern Illinois that will remain unnamed, but that's where I met Brent. So it was the wrong school to apply to, is what I'm saying. And I just did it because it's like, oh, that's what you do. You go to college now. And I was lucky enough to have that opportunity. So how were you feeling pretty confident in this decision to go out to San Francisco? I mean, it is bucking the trend of society of like, oh, now I graduate college, now I get a job, et cetera. Like, how were you feeling during all of this as you got out there with no job, et cetera?
I was absolutely terrified. Right before leaving, one of my sisters called me up and just was yelling at me, like, what are you doing? This is crazy. How could you do this? At this point, my dad had died. He died
Oh,
when I was 16 from cancer. And so she was like, what would dad think of you? What would he think of this decision?
wow.
And I was really just like unsure of myself and unsure of what I was doing. But I knew like I just needed to get away. I needed space. And I did actually have some friends from college who had moved out there. So I shouldn't say I had no place to live because I had some couches I knew I could sleep on. So it's not like I was going out there with absolutely nothing. I
Hmm.
knew like, okay, I've got some places I can stay while I get settled.
Plus, you could probably have stayed with the Tanners of Full House, because I believe they were around at that time in the 90s. Yeah. You'd learn some life lessons from Uncle Joey. Yeah, that's actually, Brent loves Uncle Joey, but we're not going to go into that. So you get out there, and so tell us about your journey out there. And well, actually, let me ask you this: how did that feel to hear from your sister, where she invoked your father who had passed away as a, it sounds like maybe a tactic to try to get you to stay. Like, did that hit pretty deep for you, or were you just like, I gotta go?
No, I think it didn't hit deep because I was really, you know, my dad had some great qualities, but he also was a very physically abusive person. And he did a lot of awful things to my mom. So it wasn't like it wasn't like he was some great person where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm disappointing him. I was more of like, good, I kind of want to disappoint him.
Mm,
I hope like there is an afterlife and he is watching what I'm doing because it would make me really happy if he saw me moving to San Francisco when he was, especially because he was like this ultra conservative,
mm,
person and really homophobic and, said a lot of really awful things growing up about people of color and all this stuff. So it's kind of
mm.
like, good, I kind of want to disappoint him. So
Makes sense.
that was good on that side, but I didn't like having my family so against, what I was going to do for sure. That was hard.
Yeah, because we all need support systems in our life, and most of us, a main support system is our family, and to buck that trend, to go against that is, yeah, that's got to be extremely hard. And tell us about the job that you did land once you got out there and you kind of got settled.
Yeah, I seriously was so lucky. I don't know how this happened. I got out there, I was couch surfing between a couple different friends, And somehow I landed this job at a worker owned, cooperatively run grocery store that was massive, that was like multi-million dollar business. But it was worker owned. So once you were there for 9 months, you were part owner, which meant you got like dividends and you got stock shares, and
Wow.
they paid really well. The insurance was incredible. The time off was incredible. It was a really hard place to get a job. Like people wanted to work there because of how great the benefits and everything were. And somehow I landed this job. I didn't know anyone there or anything. And I got this job, and it was really great because I made good money. And then plus that's where I met pretty much all of my friends because,
Hmm.
there were, I don't know, a few hundred people that worked there because it was really big. So I met a lot of people and got exposed to a lot of different ways of living in the world, because people weren't living there because they wanted to be like, or they weren't working there because they wanted to be some corporate person who took over the grocery store. People were working there to support their other things that they had going in their life. They wanted to travel, or they wanted to, they were artists, and this was a really great way to support these other things.
So you're telling me that you had a worker-owned company and you had reasonable and very good benefits. That sounds, I don't know, that sounds pretty horrible to me, you know? Anyway, and artists. Who the hell is paying artists? All right. Anyway, well, I'm off my soapbox there. At this time, are you still keeping in touch with your mom and your sisters?
I do not. I only speak to two sisters, so 2 out of 3 I have a relationship with,
Mm-hmm.
and I cut off my relationship with my mom back in 2016. So I did for a while try and like later in life, I did try to. We did reconnect, and I worked on trying to have a healthy relationship with her, but it
Uh-huh.
just kind of got to a point where I felt like it's too hard to it's not possible. So I ended up disconnecting from her, and I did see her recently, and it was actually really great for me because I was really nervous going into it. It was going to be my first time seeing her in years, and her, and then the one sister that I don't speak to. And I was really anxious about it, about how I was going to feel, but it was my niece's graduation, and I really wanted to be there for my niece. And I went, and it was the best experience of my entire life because I was so like confident in who I am now. I felt so good about my life. I felt so good about my choices that it was like literally she could say anything about me or anything to me, and it wouldn't knock me. It wouldn't matter. She could tell me whatever, like she could say whatever she wanted about my life, and it would have no impact because I feel so good about who I am and the life that I've created. And it was such a validating experience. Like I left there and I was just like, oh my gosh, if she can't rock me, like literally nobody can.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
I felt invincible.
That's awesome. That's really awesome, and that speaks to a lot of work that I'm sure that you have done throughout the years, mental health work, because you're creating those boundaries, which I think are very, 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 very difficult to keep sometimes in certain situations. But when you were out in San Francisco, you were still talking to everybody. And did they come to visit you? Like how was the communication then?
No, nobody came to visit. My communication with my family was pretty minimal at that point. I would speak to my mom on the phone maybe like once a week. I really wasn't talking to my sisters very often. And, even the communication with my mom, like at that point, I was trying so hard to get her approval. I wanted her to see, because here I was, I had a great place to live in San Francisco. Like I had incredible roommates. I had this great job where I had all this freedom. Like I worked at a job where I was able to take 2 months off to go travel around Europe.
Whoa.
and and then still come back and have this job and make more money so I could go and do more trips and more traveling. Like, it was a really great experience to have that in your early 20s. Like, it was incredible. But yet my mom didn't see it that way because there was no status attached to it. There wasn't a title. It wasn't prestigious. So she didn't want to hear about those kinds of things. So it was almost like I couldn't get her approval, but I was still trying to get it at that time.
Yeah. Status is an interesting word, and titles. It's very, if you stop and think about it, and I've been known to overthink things. And if you stop and think about it, man, status and titles are there's so much pride. I've had titles in work. I've said those titles. It makes the conversation with somebody you haven't seen in a long while a hell of a lot easier, right? Because it's like, oh, you're doing that? Great. You did it. Cool. Because society says you need to climb and climb, and you're working at a place, again, this hellscape where you're taking time off and then coming back and making good money, where that wasn't the whole goal. Now, did you stay there for a while? Where did you go next after the co-op?
Yeah, so I stayed there for a few years, and then I ended up getting hooked up through people that I met there. I then met people who ran a cooperatively run kind of childcare where they paid me even more. And at that point, I was starting to think that I wanted to work with kids. So, and I was also going back to school to get my undergrad degree. So that seemed like a good fit at that time. So I left to do that, to pursue working with kids and to finish getting my degree. And like I said, I made a lot more money at this other opportunity as well.
Awesome.
But then eventually I decided to leave, San Francisco altogether. And I wanted to go to grad school. And at that point, I felt like maybe my relationship with my family could be repaired. And I wanted it to be repaired. Like, I think I still really wanted to have a relationship with everybody. So I decided to do grad school in Chicago because that's where a couple of my sisters were living at the time, and my mom was nearby. So I moved to Chicago to pursue a graduate degree, and hoping that I would, get close with my family too.
Is it almost like, and maybe I'm stretching here, it's almost like you move back and you're still trying to fix things. And it's like you built your fort, and now your fort is in Chicago because you're near the family and you're still trying to fix things.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I was trying really hard and I wouldn't even say like fix, like I wasn't trying to fix them, but I had this like dream. I don't have it anymore, but I can say that probably even through my 30s, I still felt this really strong pull of like, I just want a family. Like, I want sisters that I can confide in. I want that dream of like having a mom who I can joke around with and who's really supportive and has like unconditional love for you. And I think I was holding on to that dream and thinking that maybe I could still have that. And so when I came back, I was trying really hard to connect with one of my sisters and her kids and to be involved in their family, because that felt like a good way in. Hanging out with my mom a lot, that felt like a good way in. But I was still trying to be myself and who I was, but I couldn't fully like be that person because my mom, I mean, this is going to sound really awful, but I don't think she's capable of unconditional love for somebody. There's always going to be strings attached. There's always conditions attached. And so even when you try and have that with somebody, but then they're always attaching something to it. So you never really get their full love.
Ooh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you're always trying to get it, but you won't because you have to do something in order to earn it all the time.
How long have you believed that to be the case? Because that's got to be a hard realization to come to, especially with somebody like your mother.
I think I would guess, I think it was 2016 when I cut things off with her, when we had our final conversation. She said some things in it where I think it was just kind of like this aha moment where it was just like, wow, I am never gonna be good enough. Like I am never gonna earn your love. And then what was really sad about it is when I got off the phone with her, I called one of my sisters and I was telling her about the conversation with our mom. And she was just kind of like laughing. And she's like, yeah, that's how mom is. And then I was just like, oh my gosh, that's so sad that you're not even shocked by the things that she said or what, and it was a really big deal, but my sister just kind of laughed it off because we were so used to it. And then
Yeah.
when I kind of digested all of that, that's when I realized like, wow, this really is just how she is. And she's not going to change. And I can't change my relationship with her. This is too unhealthy. This is too dysfunctional. I need to just take space from her and see how it feels. And the thing that really shocked me is when I took that space, what I started to realize is that the negative voice that I always had in my head that was like so filled with like self-doubt and at times like self-hatred, I started to realize that that actually wasn't my voice. That was actually her.
Oh, wow.
And it was, yeah. And once I no longer had her in my life, that voice got quieter and quieter and quieter until eventually it just went away. I was like, holy crap, all this time I thought that was me, and it wasn't.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I call my voice Frank. Thank you. What'd you go to grad school for in Chicago?
I did. So I first did counseling because originally I wanted to be a high school counselor. So I got a master's degree in counseling. And then I shadowed a high school counselor, and I was just like, this is not what I thought it was going to be at all. So I worked in community mental health for a while in Chicago, working with people with severe mental illness and helping them, just be able to live productive lives and to feel good about themselves. And it was really, really rewarding. I did that for a really long time. And then I decided that I wanted to learn more about psychology. So while I was doing that, I went back to school again to get my doctorate in clinical psychology and then transitioned over to working with adolescents at that point.
Yeah, and let's not the heroic, and I'll use the word heroic. Community mental health heroes, they're heroes, and I know, having lived in Chicago for 14 years, there's a great need for it. So, what was some of the things that you learned, learned doing that type of very intense, on the ground work before you went back to school to get your doctorate?
Probably the biggest thing I learned is that connection is like like you have to have a foundation of connection before you can do anything else. Like you can know all of the best like research and evidence, and you can know psychology in and out and like what's going to help somebody. But all of that information is useless if you haven't first connected with somebody. And when I worked with the homeless unit, where we would actually go out in the streets and look for people who were homeless and also appeared to be mentally ill. So people who were walking around talking to themselves, or maybe we'd get calls from like McDonald's being like, hey, there's a guy here who seems a little off, and we would go and check on him. So I actually had to really learn how to connect with people really quickly, and people who were really paranoid, who probably had lots and lots of trauma in their histories.
Yeah.
And just being able to just connect on the most basic human level first is the most important thing before you can do anything else. Like you can't skip that step.
Yeah, and in our culture, I would say that we want to skip any step that we feel is unnecessary because we want things to be done faster. And especially in a high stress situation, like it sounds like a lot of those were, I can imagine wanting to, again, the anxiety to want to get to the end of it and make sure that you solve the problem. But again, like you're saying, if you don't have that connection, you're not going to get to the solution that you want. So that's a really, really valuable lesson, I imagine. And I'm sure, and we're about to talk about the work you're doing now, I'm sure that it has served you very well in the work that you continue to do now.
Yes, definitely.
You said you wanted to work with adolescents. Before we move on to this, I want to point out something, and we talked about this before you came on. It's really inspiring to hear a story of somebody who doesn't just high school, college, job, et cetera, knowing what they're going to do. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it is nice to hear that there are other ways to get to something that might not be straight line. It might be a bit jagged, yeah, you know what I mean, not charcuterie board. Okay, and so and it's just really cool to hear that, and then you still end up doing what you feel like you should be doing. And I just think hearing stories like that gives me a lot of optimism, a lot of hope, just to know that there is a prevailing narrative in the society, but that doesn't mean it's going to apply for everyone. So I just wanted to make sure to call that out. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And, I hear that a lot from young adults who are struggling, like trying to figure out what their purpose is or trying to figure out what direction they want to go. And they always, they feel that narrative is true that, well, I should have, gone right through college. I should already be in a career. I should already, I don't know, be married or have a house or whatever. All of these shoulds that they're getting either from like society or from their families or from themselves on what they should be doing. And I'm always telling them like, no, there is no right way to go about this. There's no right way to live your life. It's okay to take time to figure things out, and it's okay to try something and maybe it doesn't work out, and then you're like, okay, well, now I know that's not a good fit. Now I can try something different. It doesn't mean that you failed or that you wasted time.
Yeah, I think that's just such a valuable point of view for sure. And so you get your doctorate, and then you start working with young people again, teenagers. Tell us about kind of how you got into that and like what you started doing in your postdoctorate residency.
Yeah, so I started to work because I'd been working with adults for so long in community mental health, and I started thinking that it'd be wonderful if I could actually get to some of these individuals when they're younger and help them when they're younger so that it doesn't get to the point that it did for a lot of the people that I worked with. So I started thinking that I wanted to work with younger people. I wanted to work with teens. And then I also had this pull of like, I want to be the support person that I wish I would have had when I was younger, because I didn't have that. I didn't have somebody who was 100% on my team. And I want to be that for a young person. So I was still working in community mental health and getting my doctorate. And then when it came time to apply for postdoc residency, I decided to focus in more on places that worked with adolescents and young adults so that I could get that experience. And so that led me to a group practice in the Chicago suburbs, where I was able to really start working with teens and young adults. And even though all along the way, I do always keep like a handful of adults on my roster, so I still continue to work with adults, but the bulk of my work is with teens and young adults. And I love like being able to, first of all, be that support person, but also I love it when I get to just not guide them, because that's not my role. My role isn't ever to like tell them what to do, but just to be the relaxing person or the relaxing presence in their life that things are going to work out. Because oftentimes they're getting so much pressure from their parents. If you don't do this way, things aren't going to work out for you. Or they're hearing that from school, or they're hearing that from TV. And I get to be that relaxing presence of like, no matter what direction you go, things are going to work out. And I 100% believe that, and I get to be that presence in the room for them, which I think is really special.
Really rewarding. And it does sound like very much like the type of person that you were looking for and needed in your younger years as well. So one of the things, I'll hold it up. It's an audio medium, but heck, what's fun? There's these things. Cell phones is what I held up there. Brent is looking into getting his first one. Congratulations, Brent. So on these is the good old social media, and something that you didn't have to deal with when you were a teenager. I didn't have to deal with when I was a teenager. And I want to know from somebody who is a professional who has her doctorate, who works in this. Talk to me about how social media is making it so much more challenging to be a young person today.
Well, first, like the obvious is that they are only getting a highlight reel, of other
Right.
people's lives. So they're only seeing the good parts. And even when teens know from a cognitive level, they know intellectually that they're seeing curated images. They know that, they understand like, oh, somebody chose that picture of themselves to put up, because they look good. And they know that that person has 1,000 bad pictures for every good picture that they have. But from an emotional level, when you're constantly bombarded with those things, it makes you feel like you're not good enough. You don't have enough friends. You're not thin enough. You're not doing the right things in your life. And it really beats at your self-identity and your self-image and your self-confidence. So that's like the biggest thing. But then the second biggest thing is just how it's creating almost like ADHD in
Yeah.
people
Yep.
with the distractibility. People are so distracted now by their phones and constantly checking them and looking for updates and getting notifications that they don't know how to just like almost like they don't know how to be uncomfortable, where when we were kids, we had to sit around and be bored and
Oh,
be
yeah.
uncomfortable a
Yeah.
lot. Or watch we had to sit through commercials and be annoyed. Or we had to just like sit in the car and stare out the window or listen to whatever crappy radio station our parent was playing.
Yeah.
Like
That's right.
they don't have to do that.
Sorry. It just made me think of that year and a half where my dad just played Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat over and over again on tape, the Donny Osmond version. So I'll hear a Joseph song and I'll sing all the words and people will look at me like, what the hell? Anyway, but yeah. And, I don't want to do this whole back in the day thing too much, but boredom, you hit on something there, being uncomfortable. Even now, I check my phone all the time because I feel uncomfortable that I'm missing something if I don't. But in all the mental health work that I've done, like in therapy and in books I've read, etc., they always talk about sitting with it, right? You got to sit with that feeling. And these phones and social media allow us to not sit with it and to distract it. And so it's never really addressed, I guess is the way to say it. And so that when those uncomfortable moments in real life happen, it's almost like we don't have the tools that we used to. Or would you say that's a fair assessment?
100%. Yeah, we don't. If every time, we feel discomfort, maybe I'm waiting for my friend at the coffee shop and it feels really uncomfortable to just kind of sit there and wait. I can pull out my phone and now I can check it. And so that I don't learn how to tolerate that level of discomfort. And that's just like a simple discomfort. But now I'm not getting any practice on how to deal with maybe the bigger discomforts, like the harder discomforts that exist in the world. So I'm anytime I feel just like a twinge of, whether it's boredom or a twinge of anxiety, a twinge of stress, whatever that discomfort is, I'm going to just immediately go to my phone and pick it up because I know my brain has learned like, oh, this soothes me, this relaxes me. But it's not healthy because we need to learn how to deal with discomfort. We need to learn how to deal with stress and anxiety. We need to learn how to be able to tolerate it so that it's not that big of a deal. And we learn that we're capable and we're resilient. And so then we can handle like the really big stuff that pops up too.
Right. Another thing with social media, I'm curious, do the people you work with, teenagers, do they talk to you ever about, I didn't get enough likes or my post didn't get enough engagement, that type of thing? Is that something that is brought up?
They don't bring it up usually for themselves, but they'll bring it up for what they see. They'll bring up like, oh, I can't believe so and so got that many likes, or that, she always gets so many comments on her posts, and it's, not fair because she's so thirsty, or, whatever. So like they'll see it happening to other people, and then what will happen to them is then they'll usually post less, because in the back of their mind they have that fear, I won't get as many likes or comments as so and so, so what's the point? Why should I even post or put anything out there? So they do, like, a lot of the teens I work with do a lot of like lurking online, where they're just like looking at other people's stuff, but they're not necessarily creating their own content, which is actually one of the healthy ways to engage with social media. Creating your own content is a much better way to engage with it versus just passively consuming it.
And then feeling frustrations and loneliness, and oh man, I love the term highlight reel. That's exactly what it is. It's a highlight reel of what life is. One time I had this idea to put a post on Facebook. How people, it used to be like feeling emotional or feeling this or feeling that. I wanted to put one like, just spent 45 minutes crying in the shower, and then tagging somebody I was crying about, but I didn't. So so tell us about this specific work you do. You said you have some adults, some or mostly teenagers, some adults. So what work are you doing?
So I do one-on-one brain coaching. So that's kind of like the bulk of what I do. And what I do with brain coaching is I'm helping individuals figure out what their purpose is, what they value, and creating goals around those things so that we can develop like a roadmap to get them where they want to go. And it looks different for teens versus adults, because a lot of the adults I work with, they already know a little bit more about what their purpose is and what their value is. So for them, a lot of times it's more about getting crystal clear on their goals and getting crystal clear on that roadmap, and then helping them along the way when they self-sabotage or when they go off track. I'm there to help get them back on track, or I'm there to help them work through whatever barrier they've encountered. I'm there to help guide them through it. And for teens and young adults, it's a lot of times helping them get in touch with who they are, who they want to be, and that future self that they want for themselves, and then helping them make the connection between what you do in the present moment is going to help you become that future self that you want to be, or that future that you want to have. And so creating those habits and those like daily things that you need to follow to create that future.
I don't know about Wade over there, but I feel good, and I mean this, feel good about knowing that somebody with your viewpoint and your experiences is helping people through that. Because again, the same way we talk about the discomfort of, I'm waiting for my friend at a coffee shop, unfortunately, we have to make mistakes in order to learn. But we also need to be a little bit nicer to ourselves about these mistakes. So it sounds like you're kind of working with teenagers and saying, hey, not all these are going to work out, but that this is going to build to the person you become. And that is an optimistic, hopeful, true, and essential message in my book. How can people reach out to you and find your services?
So through my website, which is destinationyou.net. So it's destinationyou.net. And there you can see I've got my one-on-one brain coaching. I have some courses that people can go through as well to help build like good mental health habits, or to help with self-confidence and goal setting. I recently wrote a book that just came out in December called The Emotionally Intelligent Teen, that you can buy wherever books are sold. And that's for teens and young adults to help build emotional intelligence, to help build like self-awareness and self-regulation and self-confidence. But you can get all of that stuff through my website.
All right. So we will definitely put the link to the website in the show notes. We'll also put a link to order your book as well. Can you say that name one more time? I was going to say it, but I didn't want to mess it up.
The Emotionally Intelligent Teen.
Emotionally Intelligent Teen. Or Not Kevin. Okay. So you're doing some really great work with young people. You're still working with adults. And, again, I have to point out again, you learned so much because you took a nonlinear path and you said, this is not who I feel I am. I need to try this. I need to try that. I need to try that. I think it's such an amazing and important story to share. And as we're wrapping up here, is there anything else? I know we've talked about a lot of stuff today about mental health, about your story and journey that you want to make sure to share before we wrap up.
No, I think you just summarized it really well that, I think my biggest message is there's no one right way to live or to go about life. And when people try and sell you on a particular path that you need to follow, you need to kind of question that person's motives.
Unless it's Amway. I'm sorry. I couldn't resist. Go ahead.
But you have to question their motives and what their agenda is and figure out what's actually best for you. And we really only know what's best for ourselves. We have to, tune out the noise of the world so that we can really tune into ourselves and get clear on that.
Awesome. Melanie, your story is inspirational. And I admire the work that you're doing, and I admire the path that you took to get there. And I really, really appreciate you coming on. And as you said, it's, I believe, destinationuyou.net. And you can get everything there. Melanie, thank you so much for your time today and for all of the very, very important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for creating this podcast. I'm so glad it exists in the world.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will go ahead and wrap up and end today's show the way I try to end every show, which is a reminder that there is always room for kindness and grace, no matter the situation and no matter if it's just us. There's room for kindness and grace, and we will see you next time on Sad Times.
You've been listening to A Fourth Hand Joint.